But Nancy's here today, and she's just, I have no idea what's on her agenda other than that she's a member of a church that has gone through this themselves in the last 18 months. And like I said, this is what she does every day. She visits congregations like Pilgrim and helps through the process. So I expect it to be somewhat interactive, and if you have questions, I'm sure Nancy would love to answer them. I've had breakfast with Nancy, so I've heard a little bit about how it goes. She came and talked to the board and the elders as well, and so they've heard some of this before. And we thought it would be great to have her come in and talk to the congregation so that everybody can start to hear the process that this, as we go about defining who Pilgrim is, post-pastoral, and what we want in a permanent pastor. So please welcome Nancy Nyland.
Hello. There we go. Okay. So, as Greg said, I'm Pastor Nancy Nyland. My title is Director for Evangelical Mission. Some of you at first service heard this already, so you get to hear it again. I am actually employed by our church-wide expression of the church, ELCA church-wide. Do you know where our national offices are? Chicago. Oh, some of you are cheating. You heard that at 8. Chicago. There is a director for Evangelical Mission, what we call DEM, because we love acronyms in the church, right? There's a DEM in every synod of the ELCA. Do you know how many synods we have across the ELCA? How many? 65. Very good. 65 synods across the ELCA. So some synods have more than one states in them, like ours, Indiana, Kentucky. Some states have more than one synod. For instance, Minnesota, where Lutherans are very dense. Oh, you got the joke. I love it. There are 6 synods in Minnesota, believe it or not. Northeast, Northwest, Minneapolis area, St. Paul area, and Southeast and Southwest. So anyway, 65 synods in the ELCA. I'm deployed from the national church out into the synod, Indiana, Kentucky. And part of what we do as DEMs is we provide a bridge or a connection between the 3 expressions of the church. Congregations just like yours, the synod, and then ELCA church-wide. So I do hope while I'm here among you, you feel that connection, that bridge, because we're all a part of this great church, the ELCA, and the work we do together. In my job as DEM, I work with our New Start congregations. I work with congregations that are in intentional redevelopment and so have pastor redevelopers who have been trained to lead them. I work with any kind of congregational renewal and mission, area mission conversations, stewardship, evangelism, outreach, mission support, and I also work with our 6 campus ministries as well. So our campus ministry committee from our synod just met in Lexington at UK the last 2 days. So a little bit of what I do. So much of what I do takes me out and about in congregations just like yours. So it's definitely a delight and a privilege to be here with you. I live in Fishers. I belong to Servants of Christ Lutheran Church, which is in the Lawrence area. Some of you know maybe where that church is. Our pastor retired, it'll be 2 years ago this coming July. So we just went through a similar process that you are entering into, that time in between pastors. Our pastor that retired is Pastor Al too. Al Ryder, not your same Al. And so certainly I feel your grief and your sorrow, your fear, your hesitation, your angst as you're looking at this next time as well, because we've been through that. This time, and you'll hear this again in my sermon as you come to late service, this time in between is really a gift for you as a congregation. That time is a time that you get to discern who God's calling you to be in the next step of your journey as a congregation. What's your next step? What's your next journey, the next leg of your journey going to be like for Pilgrim Lutheran Church What's God calling you to do? Who is God calling you to be? How is God calling you to impact this area, this neighborhood, this community of Carmel? I don't think it's any accident that you're located right here, right now. I know that many of you drive from other places. All of our congregations, it seems these days, are destination congregations, right, where people drive to them. But you're located here, and so you have a responsibility to this neighborhood and this community around here. How are you making it a better place to be? My dad was a pastor, and we moved many times during my lifetime. And my parents taught my brother and I that when you move to a community, you don't just take from that community, you make that community a better place to be, right? You give to the community as well. So how are you, Pilgrim, making this a better place? I think that's a question we always have to be pondering. What is God calling us to do? And I'll speak for us as servants of Christ. We're really good at gathering money and supporting mission and ministry with our dollars. But we're not so good at doing mission and ministry in our neighborhood or community with our hands and our feet and our voices. And so that's something that we discovered about ourselves during that in-between time, and we set goals for ourselves as we called a new pastor, that we wanted someone to lead us to be more active in the neighborhood and the community. And so we were listening during that time in between to what people thought about all of that and other things as well. As servants of Christ, we formed in between what we called a discovery team to do just that. Discover who we were now, who we were called to be without Pastor Al being our pastor, who we were being called to be in the future. So it would help us to know what kind of pastor, who's the pastor we need to be calling the next time, who's going to be best for us. And so we did several things during that interim time. We did an exercise where we discovered the assets of the people in the congregation. Because who's your biggest asset here? The people, right? Any congregation's biggest asset is the people. You have a glorious building, that's an asset to you too. You have monetary resources, you have a preschool, you have lots of assets here, but your biggest asset are the people who are gathering. Your faith community, right, who gather and don't gather, perhaps, on the periphery there, and the time, the talents, the gifts, the abilities that you have to offer. That's a big asset you have here. And so we took time to do an discovering asset exercise so we could identify some of those assets of our congregational members. We asked questions like, what's your greatest gift? And people would say, what do you mean by that? We're like, whatever you think that means. We want to know what you think your greatest gift is. This is one of my favorite questions. What do you know well enough you could teach someone else? Can you imagine the assets we discovered from that question? What do you know well enough to teach someone else? Everybody got an answer in their mind? Huh? Okay, so we went through this. We also asked questions about the congregation and the building. What's a hidden asset of this building that very few people know about? Okay, so we gathered that information. We also did community leader conversations. So we looked at who are leaders in the neighborhood and the community around here, and then people volunteered to go and meet with them, to talk to them about what some of the needs were. Who are the people who they might be serving? So we went to social service agencies, other congregations, hospitals, clinics, the school for sure, right? Superintendents, principals, the fire department, the police. Leaders in your community who see the community from a different vantage point than you do, perhaps, to learn about the community and what opportunities there might be for us to engage in the community or partner with them in doing things in the community. We did an exercise called SWOT. Have you heard of SWOT? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you kind of do a 4, on a big flip chart, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and we gathered in small groups. And we had many opportunities for people to gather. Sometime during like this hour, right, between worship, we gathered on Saturdays, we gathered on evenings. We did this with our youth group. We did it with our senior group. We did it with the choir, so small groups that were already gathering, we did SWAT with, and then we invited others to gather as small groups so that they could share what they thought the strengths of our congregation were, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and also the threats of moving forward to where we felt God was calling us. We also did what we, a Survey Monkey. You know Survey Monkey? Some of you do. It's an online survey that you create. It really has nothing to do with monkeys that I know of, does it? I never saw a monkey, but anyway. There are questions on your ministry site profile. This is the paperwork you'll fill out when you're ready to start looking at candidates. And there's questions on there like, what are the 5 top abilities or strengths that you're looking for in a pastor? So the 5 top and then 5 more that you would prefer. So there's a couple of 3 questions like that on this ministry site profile. So we made that into a survey, put it out on SurveyMonkey for those who were tech savvy, had it on paper for those who weren't, so that we could gather results from the congregation and find out what the whole congregation was thinking rather than just the council or the call committee was thinking that these strengths should be. Anyway, those are some of the things. Oh, we also did demographic work. So we were looking at the demographics around our church as well, so that we knew the community that we were serving and the population that we were serving as well. So we did that over a several-month period, and all of the time we were bathing that process in prayer. And we were discerning. We were listening to what is God saying to us about servants of Christ Lutheran Church. What's God whispering in our ears or speaking to us through other people? And then we were sharing that with the leaders. I think often we sit here and think, oh, we have a council, we have elders, they'll just take care of all of this. You know what? God doesn't just talk to them. He talks to all of you. And so we all need to be involved in this process. We had a journey map in our entryway. We did a path, and then we had stones that one of our people who's a great artist, she made stones out of brown paper somehow. And every time we accomplished a task or part of this journey, we put that up so that we could see that we were on a path, that we were journeying towards calling a new pastor. So we had that visual, which I think was helpful. We also had an interim pastor. We called a part-time interim pastor at Servants. And having that consistent pastoral leadership on Sunday mornings was very helpful. Having someone to visit those who are sick and in need was very helpful. So to take care of those day-to-day pastoral duties was very helpful. To kind of help settle us down a little bit, not be so anxious, so that we could take the time as we needed in this in-between to really discern what God was calling us to and who God was calling us to be and who God was calling us to call, right, as the next pastor. So I'm going to shut up for a little bit and let you speak. So we shared this with the council, and I think they're discerning some kind of process like that. And again, I emphasize every process has to be contextual. So what we did at Servants, some of it might work here, and you may want to do other things here or tweak it or change it a little bit, because every congregation is different. Every context is different. You may not have misunderstood, but the issue is that there's not always someone available to be an interim pastor right away. Okay? I mean, we don't have a bucket, so to speak, of interim pastors who are waiting to be assigned. Many of our interim pastors are already serving interims. And so it all depends on the timing. Do you understand what I'm saying? And actually, sounds like Rudy, go ahead.
Yeah, June 1, I mean, I think it was the target date. To some degree, you're right. They said it's not going to hurt to go a couple of services with pulpit supply. I mean, the ELCA, the Synod expects it. Bob can speak to it. They've got a list of pulpit supply folks, right? So we were guided to end well with Pastor Al and not be distracted with interviewing candidates while Pastor Al is sitting next to us. So we followed that advice. We talked at the council meetings, at the board meetings, and decided that we would target June 1 as the date.
Yeah. So
no guarantees on June 1. I got a call Friday afternoon. I was out. Haven't called back Rudy Mueller, but he said he's got a name for us to interview. One name. It's not like we got, to Nancy's point, we don't have a pick of 5 individuals.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
Did Servants of Christ call a pastor?
Yes, we have.
Good. The second one is, how many are our seminaries graduating every year, and how many vacancies are there for pastors?
Okay. So the seminaries are not graduating near enough people to fill vacancies right now, but also we're not just looking at seminary graduates either. I can't tell you that number because Rudy Mueller works with all of that mobility in our Synod, but I'll tell you that there always needs to be some vacancies or there's no room for pastors to move around, right? So we always need to have some vacancies in order for that to happen. So, so there's not enough seminary graduates, but there are pastors who are looking to move. I don't have those numbers. Rudy would have those numbers. Greg can maybe find them out if you would like to know that. But
I'm a numbers guy, and you'd think those things would stick in my head, but they don't. But there's a lot. In fact, Pastor Yaka, say his name?
Yakabatsi.
Yes, thank you. He shared with us Tuesday that just in the last 3 months in our Synod, there have been a number of retirements and moving around, so there's probably more vacancies in our Synod now than they would normally expect. So it's just kind of a timing of how that all happened. But, you know, that's part of the process.
So just so you know, time-wise for us, Pastor Al retired in July, and the next year in September is when our new pastor started. So it was a little over a year.
They had, some of the guidance that we had received from Rudy and the Synod was in terms of setting expectations, that you should expect to take 1 month for every year that your pastor was here. 1 month for every year. Pastor Al was here 19 years, I think. So
18, 19, how many?
Yeah, so
Okay.
you know, you think about that, you're talking, you know, it's an 18-month window that before you end up with permanent. Doesn't have to be that, but that's what that is the expectation.
And you'll have an interim in that. And before you get the interim on June 1st, already you have a vacancy pastor,
Yes.
right, who is
yes.
meeting with the council and providing pastoral care as needed.
Yeah, I think he's actually doing some of the Wednesday services, and his name was published in the bulletin and went out in an email blast. And,
I noticed it was in the announcements today.
yeah.
Yep.
You know, one thing, Lynn, to kind of address your point, the church has been through this before, and the one thing that, and I've not been through it at Pilgrim, but the one thing that I think is different today than it was 20 years ago is we have technology on our side. So so the way this process works, as it was described to me, was we will post a ministry site profile. Who are we? That's what we're going to do here for the next several months, is to figure out who Pilgrim is without Pastor Al. That goes out on a website. Any pastor in any part of the country can pull up that ministry site profile. In the ELCA. And so we're not limited like we were before to reliance on the ELCA or the Synod to get our site profile out to individuals. There obviously is some work
Actually, it does go through the ELCA website,
Yes.
but it's a national search.
Right, but anybody can access it, right?
Yeah,
Anybody,
exactly.
even if they're not looking necessarily, they can access it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I know there has been, people have raised concerns to me privately that they're concerned that, you know, we'll only get to interview those who are looking for a job, and that's just not the case. If we have the right assets and we have the right we do our job and we do it thoughtfully and thoroughly, this ministry site profile will attract the best and the brightest, the one that's going to be right for us. And that's our job. That's not the ELCA's job. That's not the Synods' job. That's Pilgrim's job, and that's what we need help to do that. Nancy mentioned hands and boots and mouths in the community. We need hands and boots and mouths in the congregation for the next 6 months to make this work and to do it right. The other thing that I'll say that more than one, and I have met with Nancy twice now. I've talked to Rudy Mueller at the Synod probably 3 or 4 times. I had breakfast with a pastor who just took a call over in Fishers, and they all said the same thing. You're better off taking more time and getting the right person than taking less time and getting the wrong person. And we just have to keep that in mind. It's just absolutely critical that we do it that way, in my opinion. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, hold on. This is actually picking up recorded, so you're going to be.
So I remember when you spoke to us earlier, and it was so comforting to hear your thoughts toward us. I'm curious if there's anything that you have prepared or that you can give us advice on talking to children, particularly those from 1st to 6th grade, to help walk them through such a process.
I'm thinking about that a minute. I'm thinking about what experience they might have, and especially 1st through 6th grade, move from one grade to another and move from one teacher to another. And so you might liken it to that. You've had a teacher all year now, and next year you're going to have a new teacher. And your teacher now loves you and cares about you and has taught you well, and your new teacher is going to love you and care about you and teach you well. And so Pastor Al loved you. Our next pastor will too. Yes, go ahead. Oh, substitute teachers. Yes, that's a great, likening that to the interim pastor to a substitute teacher. Yes. Who's temporary, right? But also teaches, cares for them, right? Yes, definitely. And I think that, and I say this to you as the people, your interim is going to be here for a short time. And so sometimes we hesitate to build relationship with that interim because it's like, oh, this is someone else we're going to have to say goodbye to. And I understand that. I understand how hard those goodbyes are. But the reason the goodbyes are hard is because we've loved, right? We've built relationships. So take time to build relationship with the interim. The interim's here to care for you, especially during this time of grief and sorrow for you. We know this is a grieving time. We know this is a hard time. You've had Pastor Al for 18 years. That's difficult to let that person go. And so the interim is here to help you through that grief and that sorrow as well.
About, I know I just said that Rudy has given us a name. Well, he hasn't given me a name, but he says he has a name. But what is the source typically? They've described 3 sources of interim pastors and where they come from and why they're interim pastors.
So you know those 3 sources?
I know those 3.
Oh, say them, because Rudy works with interims, okay. And I work with the missional part, Director for Evangelical Mission. Got that? So he works with the transition. And honestly, I say tongue-in-cheek, I try not to know any more than I have to know because I don't want to do his job. Okay. So if you know the 3, please share that.
So I don't know where this name is coming from, but there are individuals that choose to be interim pastors.
And are trained.
They're trained to be interim pastors. That's what they do. They go from congregation to congregation, maybe move from state to state. There are retired pastors that do this. time to time. And then there are pastors that are in between permanent calls that can be an interim pastor. So those are the sources of these interim pastors typically, just in case anybody was curious.
I do know that the interim pastors that do this is their call, that they're called by our Synod Council to be what we call intentional interim pastors, and they've received training for that. So we have a variety of people. And Rudy meets with the interim pastors quarterly, so they have continuing education and they talk about what's happening in their congregations, and so he can help educate and encourage them as well. And they can encourage one another. Other questions? By the way, you're doing a great job with the kids. What you've told them is wonderful. It's not going to be easy for them either. Not easy for any of us.
Anybody else have any questions? Dave, hold on a second. Let me get your mic.
You spoke about services, and you also spoke about taking on hospital calls. What can we assume that pastor, I mean, is that it? Or will that pastor be here day in, day out? Please help me with that.
Yeah, that depends on whether you have a full-time or a part-time, but my understanding is you're calling a full-time interim, and so they will function as your pastor. Obviously not having the history that Pastor Al had, so learning from you and relying on your leadership as well, but they will function in all those pastoral duties.
Full-time. That's what we've asked for. We don't know whether we need it. We knew 20 hours wasn't enough. We weren't sure if 30 was enough. Thought maybe. But we said, you know what, we'll do 40, and if we need to modify the contract when the time comes, we'll do that. So that's the goal, full-time.
And I hope you heard that the council interviews that interim pastor. We don't just say, this is going to be your interim pastor. You interview. If that's the person you think will work fine. If not, we'll look for somebody else. So please don't settle. Do not settle in any point of this call process. Don't settle for your next pastor because you're thinking, oh, it's been too long. Don't settle for an interim. Call the one that God is calling you to. It truly is worse to have the wrong pastor than to have no pastor. Been there, done that. Did I hear that? And we've experienced that, some of us.
Okay. During this process, and I know this has changed over the years, but as soon as somebody identifies, or the calling committee identifies maybe several individuals, is it still the process, or has it changed at all, that the call committee actually goes and visits if they are in a church, listens to that, then comes back with a recommendation, and then they are asked to come and preach, you know, a certain amount of times here or so forth? Has that changed at all?
Do you want to answer that, or you want me to?
I can answer it, and you can kick me under the table if I get it wrong.
Go ahead.
So obviously technology has changed, and so a lot of the work can be done, you know, the first cut. Most of them will have posted sermons on the web, or you can arrange to have video and streamed. You know, that's kind of cut one. On-site visits clearly are going to happen, and then obviously we wouldn't hire somebody without the congregation being able to hear them speak. You mean oh yeah, it's going to be face to face. But the first cut, you could be. Doesn't have to be. But the first interaction may be just video.
So basically, the call committee will let Rudy know how many candidates they would like to interview in the first round, usually 2 to 3.
3, that's kind of what he said. He's
3,
in blocks of 3.
And then what happens, because this is a national search, sometimes our congregations, instead of going through the expense to bring them on site for that first interview, might do a Skype interview with them if they're clear across, say they're in Seattle or something. Okay, so like Greg is saying, the first cut, may be more electronic. You know, it's like, okay, we want these 3, and maybe we can't decide between these 2, so then maybe we want to go to the expense to invite them for a face-to-face interview. Or maybe some of you want a vacation in Seattle, and so you're going to go out there and listen to them preach, right? Anyway, but a lot of times it's a Skype-type interview if there's those distances involved, just because of expense. And then the call committee eventually will recommend one person to the council, and then they also will interview and then decide whether they're going to recommend that person to the congregation. And then, of course, a pastor is only called when the congregation votes to do that. So it's the congregation's decision.
Okay, just to follow up with that, and this is probably more for Greg. Has the call committee been selected? You have people?
I have names. We won't call the committee until we're ready to call the committee.
Okay, and to you, Nancy, do you have, is there a right number of people to be on a call committee? Is it based on congregational members, or is it based on more practical? How many people do you need?
There is information on all of that on the IK website, right?
Yes.
So, and maybe you've decided that already,
Yes,
Greg.
we haven't officially decided. We think the number is going to be around 9. That's just based on talking to folks. I heard somewhere between 5 and 11. We've got 15 people that have responded that said they want to be on it. What I'll say, and I know we had this in the bulletin, and there was some folks pressuring because they thought this was the first step. If that's step 1, we got to start at step 0. And we've got a discovery process to go through here, and that's the first thing to do. We'll call the committee when it's time to do the interviews, and that's, that might be after Christmas, quite honestly. So what I'm hoping from this group and from those that aren't here and those that have said they want to be part of the call committee, that they're passionate enough to help us through the discovery process. At least preliminarily, we think there's going to be probably 3 individuals that are going to be very involved throughout the discovery process. And then there's going to be a lot of people that need to come in and out and help those 3. Back to my point of having boots on the ground, hands working, voices heard. And I can't stress that enough. The council's not going to do it. We're not going to do it. There may be a person from the council, part of the process, but it's going to take those in this room, those who said they want to participate in the call process, and those that are in the congregation to do this.
You mentioned that the Synod would recommend candidates as we go along. It's been 20 years since we've done this, but when we did this the last time, we also had recommendations come in from our own congregation and so on. Are these still fair game?
Those names can go to the Synod from the call committee. Everything works through the Synod, though, because of how that works with everything that's online, etc. But there will be a time that we'll say, are there suggestions from the congregation or the call committee, and then Rudy will follow up those suggestions to see if those people are open to looking for call or not, or yes. So. He also looks at, they fill out what's called a RLP, acronym, Rostered Leaders Report. That's about a 15-page report that pastors fill out, rostered leaders fill out when they are ready for mobility. And so that tells a congregation a lot about that person. So Rudy reads through those because he will have read your ministry site profile, he will have talked to Greg and know some of the things that you're looking for. So for instance, this is just if administration is one of your big things, we want our pastor to be a good administrator, and he looks at the roster leaders report and administration is nowhere on the strengths of this person, then he may not, think, well, I'm not going to pass that name on because it's going to be a waste of your time, okay? So yeah, Rudy will kind of screen that, but if you've asked for that person and they're interested, he'll probably give you that name. If they're open for mobility, right? They may say, nope, I'm happy in my call, I'm not interested, okay? So yes. We work with you, okay? We want to help you call the person God's calling you to engage.
You brought up the point that the administration is our strong need, and does this individual have administration? Who does the evaluation of these pastors or these candidates or anyone within the Synod?
Pretty much Rudy and the bishop.
Just that.
Pretty much. And the Holy Spirit. Yes.
Was there, I mean, I don't know, maybe there was more to your question. When you say who does the evaluation, we will be doing interviewing, of course.
No, but to get the names to you is what you're
well,
saying.
Prior
Yep.
to, we can't,
Right.
we can't, interview everyone. So they have to have some gifts
Right.
listed out.
They do.
Somewhere.
On their roster leaders report. On their RLP, roster leaders profile. Yeah, 15 pages of who this pastor is.
Yeah, so somebody described it to me as like Match.com almost. Maybe not quite the underlying
Match.com.
algorithms, but
Okay, let's not spread that rumor, please.
does that summarize it? Oh, maybe that's what it is.
You know, it is one reason that we're here, that we come, we like to preach, we like to meet with the council, we like to meet with the call committee. I will engage with you in the discovery process as you need me to resource that. So we get to know some of who you are. You know, the staff has input into that as well. We talk about these things at staff meetings also. So we're here. Rudy's probably going to be here sometime and preach.
Yeah, 22nd maybe, May 22nd.
Okay, so again, we want to be out and about and get to know who you are too, because it helps in that match process, right? Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? How are we doing on time? We got time.
And I just want to say one more thing. You know, say you get 3 names and you think none of these are the person. Sometimes I've heard congregations say, even though we say to them differently so many times, well, if we don't take one of these, we're not going to get anyone else. That is not true. If one of those 3 is not it, then tell him and we will give you other people to interview. He will do that, okay? Our goal is the same as your goal, to help you find the person that is right for your next pastor, who God is calling. Already calling, I might say. God already knows who your next pastor is. So be praying for that person.
Anybody else? Questions? I'm going to have 4 emails before I get home from lunch today about questions, I'm sure. Okay. Well, Nancy, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
You're
I'm
welcome.
sure we'll see you more than just today.
You
as
will
we go
see
through
me. You may be tired of seeing me, but no. Yep, you'll see me again, definitely. You're welcome.